Some thoughts on leadership from Dick Winters. Leadership's defining quality is honesty. To honesty, add fairness and consistency. I was able to develop a sixth sense during the war that allowed me to size up a situation rapidly. I could look at terrain and be able to see opportunities instead of challenges. By leading from the front, I believe I achieved a high degree of success. So I thought this was a very, very interesting combination. Honesty, fairness, and consistency. You don't hear those a lot about being a great leader. I mean, I always talk about the number one attribute of a leader is humility. And I definitely believe that humility is important, but honesty, that's clearly a thought and a concept of leadership that I think that misses a lot of people. I think, and we've talked about plenty of cases on the podcast here where we say, oh, what if this is going on? And I say, look, you want to be honest with them. You know, so I've definitely said that before, but I'm going to start saying it more because I'm learning a little something from Dick Winters today. But, you know, I remember we had a case where someone was saying, hey, I'm going to leave this job or I'm going to take another job. And what should I do? Should I tell them? Should I not? And we kind of went around and I was like, look, just tell them the truth. Just say, look, hey, this is what's going on. I've got a better opportunity. I'm going to take it and in the long run, you're going to be better off if you're honest with people. And so obviously to think about this quality, it's something I've thought about, but not as clearly as this, as Dick Winters saying that's the defining quality. That's obviously important. Something that I will talk about more now. Definitely believed it, but we'll talk about it more. Now, if you've seen the movie Band of Brothers or the series Band of Brothers, they do a good job of showing the beginning when they form up, and there's a guy in leadership position called Captain Sobel, and he's not a good leader. And they do a good job of portraying why he wasn't a good leader in the series. But here's what Dick Winters had to say about it. Back to the book. Captain Sobel commanded through fear and intimidation. That is not how a leader should conduct himself. Sobel was not just unfair, he was mean-spirited. His attitude created a special bond within Easy Company that allowed the men to identify with their platoons more so than with the company, which is more normal in most military units. Second lieutenants, by their nature, are a clannish group. So you got a company commander, and then he's got usually three platoons underneath him, and each one of those is run by a second lieutenant. So these second lieutenants are the platoon commanders. Second lieutenants, by their nature, are a clannish group. Some are more serious than others, but for the most part, they wander around a military post, as General Eisenhower once said, in a rather aimless search for excitement. Easy Company's platoon leaders, of which I was one, did our best to take care of our soldiers to soften Sobel's dictatorial behavior. I lost all respect for our commander the day he announced to the officers, in Easy Company, we will lead through fear, not by example. That's just the opposite of any leadership principle that I could ever conceive, is to lead through fear instead of example.
Kind of like when your dad, well, I don't know about your dad, but if your dad says, or if you say to your kids, do what I say, not what I do. You know that?
Yeah,
I've heard that before.
For sure. That's it. And if you want to put the fear onto that, it's do what I say, not what I do, or else. Yeah, I'm going to get out the belt. Or the kids down south, they say, yeah, then I'm going to get out the switch. Yeah, get out the switch.
My dad would say that, not all the time, but, you know, he said that before.
He said switch? Where was he from?
Dad's from Brooklyn, New York.
They ain't got no switches in Brooklyn, New York, I'm here to tell you.
On Kauai, they do.
On Kauai, they found some, huh?
He made me go get my switch. He said, go get a switch. I don't know what that means, by the way, at this point.
Oh, because you're a little kid.
Yeah.
Go get one.
And I'm from Kauai. They don't say switch, you know, apparently. Other people say switch, so I didn't know, which made him kind of more mad.
So then he had to brief you on what a switch was?
Yeah, he didn't.
This is the thing I'm going to beat you with.
Yeah, it's kind of like digging your own grave in a way, you know?
Very similar.
Conceptually, yeah.
Very similar.
Yeah.
Back to the book. It made such an impression on me that I recorded his words in my diary. Under ordinary circumstances, a junior company officer attempts to reflect his company commander's leadership style. but Easy Company's lieutenants found that they simply could not emulate the image of Sobel and still live with themselves. Sobel had no friends within the company and few within the regiment. At the end of each day, he went one way and we lieutenants went another, hoping not to run into him at the officers' club. He lacked confidence in his own ability as an infantry commander. He was completely honest, but he couldn't read a map to save his neck. His knowledge of tactics and fire and maneuver was extremely poor. So, a horrible situation. And this is one of those things where he's talking about how no one wanted to hang around with him, right? And I've heard leaders say, a good leader's not going to be liked or not going to be loved by everyone. And that's there's some truth to that, right? Of course, not everyone's going to love you, but there's also a difference when no one likes you.
Yeah.
That you're not doing a good job. You're not doing a good job at all. And, I hung out with all my guys all the time. Through the chain of command. Everyone wanted to hang out. Let's go. Let's hang out. It wasn't running away from me at the end of work to escape.
Yeah.
That's not a good sign.
Yeah. Like one guy say, I'm not here to make friends.
Yeah, that's another classic, right? I'm not here to make friends. No, but I actually, I've heard officers say that in the military. SEAL officers, I've heard say, look, you, and they'll say like, hey, it's not a popularity contest, which it's not. Clearly, you're going to make decisions that are going to be hard for people to swallow. But to have people running away from you because they don't like you as a human being, that's not a good position to be in. You're not doing a good job as a leader. You need to reassess what you're doing and how you're doing it. And this is kind of reflective of what Dick Winter's attitude was. Back to the book. Easy Company didn't belong to me. It belonged to the soldiers. I was privileged to be a small part of its history. Officers, and commanders in particular, are merely caretakers. That the paratroopers respected me is more than enough reward. So there's just totally different attitude, right? And there's something weird that happens with the military. You'll hear a guy, it's a contradictory state. There's a dichotomy. You'll hear a guy say, my soldiers,
right,
or my Marines. And there's two ways that can be taken. One of them is very positive. My soldiers. I am going to take care of my soldiers. Hey, don't come down here and talk to my soldiers like that.
Right.
Or, hey, I need to make sure my soldiers have the gear that they need. I need to make sure my Marines have, and they mean that in the best possible way. There's another side to that, which is completely negative, which is, these are my Marines, meaning you own them, meaning I'll do what I want with them.
Right.
And so I've seen guys on both sides of that edge, and you can hear a good leader say my Marines, you can hear a good leader say my soldiers, you can hear a good leader say my SEALs, and think of it in a positive way, and you can have a crappy leader say my soldiers, my Marines, my SEALs, and you just think, dude, no, stop. And so and especially when you get Dick Winters, who is universally respected in the military and definitely in his battalion and in his company. And he's a guy that's saying, look, it was theirs. That just tells you that's where your leadership perspective should come from. Yeah.
I always felt that a better way, instead of saying my, one of the few things, as far as feelings go, because I experience that a lot when people be like, my this and that, and I see what you're doing. It's like you're just the boss and the owner of all this kind of thing, kind of thing. But it felt like, and feels like with people like my soldiers, there is a lot of room for because man, these are my brothers, my guys. But let's say if they're talking about like something else, like a big one, like the bartenders I used to work with, every once in a while you'd have one and say, well, I got this in, my bar. And when they talk to the customers, they'll be like, hey, what kind of, I don't know, vodka do you have? He goes, well, my best vodka is, this and that. Then they'd say my, kind of like, I'm the master of this whole domain here. Everything here is mine and that I can bestow upon you kind of feeling. Yeah. Yeah, that always kind of.
Well, they do it out. Definitely in the military with inanimate objects, not just soldiers and Marines and sailors. They do it with inanimate objects, and you learn that in boot camp, where they say, why are you on my parade deck?
Right. Yes.
And it gives you this feeling of like, dang, this guy's really into this parade deck, meaning, where you do marching.
Yeah.
And they say, get off my parade deck.
Yeah.
And it instills that kind of personal pride about something. So
Yeah.
again, even that one can go both ways.
Yeah, I guess so.
I guess you really have to understand what your intent is behind what you're saying, and you have to be careful. I always feel subconscious about that. And I'll give you an example. My gym.
Yeah.
Right? My gym.
Yeah.
When I talk about Victory MMA, which we have partners and it's not solely my gym.
Yeah.
But it's my gym where I train, right? But sometimes someone will say something and I'll feel like, oh, where do you train? And I could say, I train at my gym. You know what I mean? I feel like a real turd when I do that. So I got, Victory MMA and Fitness, Oh, Dean Lister, Jeff Glover. Yeah, that's where I train. And, oh, wait, do you own that place? Yeah, I'm one of the owners,
right.
Blah, blah, blah. But, yeah, you don't like that.
Oh, you got to say.
Just be careful. Just be careful with it. Be careful with that, too.
I always thought if you said our, especially even in a bartender situation, what we have, it's kind of like us as an establishment,
right.
Kind of thing. I'm part of that. When you say our, you're part of it, so it kind of still puts that forward. Like I'm kind of giving this to you or offering whatever. I'm taking some ownership, but it's like I'm not the boss of this thing. It kind of feels that way. That's what I always thought. Yeah. So even if you, like in your situation, if you're like, someone say, hey, Jocko, where do you train? We say, well, at our gym,
Yeah.
And it's kind of ambiguous as well, which kind of seems more humble, where it's like, oh, yeah, you could be just a member, but at least you're part of that community, kind of thing. Yeah. So, yeah, use our.
We'll gotta be careful.
That's what we're going to.
That's all I'm saying is you gotta be careful.
Yeah, fully.
Be careful with my Marines, my soldiers. And again, sometimes that's the most positive thing you could possibly say. Mm-hmm. These are my SEALs. Hey, don't come down here and think you're going to put my SEALs out in the field in a bad situation. Not happening. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. You're protective. They're your brothers. You have ownership of them, but it's in the positive way.
Yeah.
As opposed to, look, I'll deploy my SEALs wherever I see fit. Like, oh, put a red flag on that dude's face.
Yeah. Right.
Back to the book. I think of Easy Company every day. We sustained 150% casualties between the night that we jumped into Normandy and VE Day. 150% casualties. So for those of you that are wondering how you do that is you have people getting wounded multiple times and coming back to the front, and when your replacements show up, they get wounded too. So you've got 150 people in your company, and over the course of time, people get wounded and leave, and new people come in to take their place, and they get wounded as well. And that's how you get up over 100% of your people being wounded. The result of sharing all the stress throughout training and combat has created a bond between the men of Easy Company that will last forever. In a sense, I don't think I ever left Company E. I may never again see the type of men in this outfit, but to me, Easy Company will always be my company, in the sense that I will always remain a part of it. To this day, they remain my second family. I still look at these men with great respect I can't describe in words. So there, he makes it same thing. Like, he feels uncomfortable saying mine. He has to put a quantifier on it and explain, hey, not in that sense, but I'll always be a part of it. That's why it's mine. Mm-hmm. More about leadership. Back to the book. Leadership is difficult to define. They talk about leadership at West Point every day. Leadership starts with honesty, dedication, and having a man who is dependable and fair. If you never deviate from the standards that you established, men have faith in you, and you'll be out front to set the example. Sergeant Talbert once told me, "Sir, I'd follow you into hell." I take a great deal of pride in his remark. So again, we're getting this. Leadership starts with honesty, dedication, dependable, and fair. So important, being fair. And you see that a lot when it comes to doling out punishment when people make mistakes. Are you fair or not? Does that person really deserve to lose their pay for 90 days or go on bread and water or whatever kind of punishment you're going to bestow on someone?
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair? And people know if things are fair or not.
Yeah.
People know what's reasonable.
Hey, do you think that, when people say I'm going to make an example out of somebody, for sometimes it's for different reasons. Maybe like, I've been letting people slack, so I gotta make an example out of somebody to kind of reestablish the discipline kind of thing. Or maybe, as a boss or whatever, you really don't like this specific violation. Like it's just one of your things, so you can make an example for that reason. Do you think that that's fair?
It can be, but it's also a touchy subject. You tell me. I personally think, let's say I'd been given some slack and people have been showing up a little bit late, and I'm kind of like, hey man, we need to be a little more on time. And then finally on a Thursday, guy shows up late for the meeting, and I say, hey, you're suspended, you're grounded, you have to work this weekend. I punish them hard, super hard. That doesn't make sense, right? That doesn't make sense. Right. And people say, it's not being consistent because people have been being late. However, if I was to say, hey guys, check it out, Bill's just walking in right now, and I've been letting it slide. And I'll tell you what, this is where it's getting us. We've been later and later. We start slacking here. We're going to start slacking in other places. We can't afford to slack right now. Our mission's too important. From now on, if you're late showing up to this meeting, or you're late to an evolution that we're about to do, I'm going to drop the hammer. Yeah. So don't be late. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Fair warning, explanation as to why. That's fair, in my opinion. Just going off the handle and smashing someone because you want to make an example of them, that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
I don't like it. I don't do it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Can it be useful? Yes. If there's a clearly delineated expectation that's been set and it gets violated for whatever reason, and you are going to crush and destroy to set an example, and actually we're going to get to a point where he talks about that in here, there is an example set. And that has to send a message to everyone. That can do that. I've done that with my family. Hey, here's the line. If you cross it, you will remember for a very long time that you made a bad decision.
Yeah.
And my other kids, when I've done that to one of my kids that has made a bad decision, they all remember. All of them.
Yeah.
They don't want to make that mistake.
Yeah, it seems like you
don't want to cross the line.
No, not at all. Like how you said, if you give them kind of ample warning, where you kind of give them the tools to make their own decision, kind of thing. Even if you are changing a policy or whatever, harsher punishments, all this stuff. As long as you warn them, like how you're saying, that seems like fair. And a huge one, which I always kind of thought was, if it applies to everyone, like if this violation, this punishment for this violation applies to everyone. Sure, it just happens to be this guy because he happens to be the one that committed the violation or whatever. But this rule, this policy applies to everybody.
Yeah, and also when you explain these things, you don't blame them. If you notice, even when I just said, hey guys, I've been letting slack here. You don't say, look, you guys have been slack. No, so look, I didn't make it clear why this is important. Yeah. And therefore, you guys have been, I've been letting you slack. You guys have been showing up late. That's a problem. We can't have that problem anymore. So you just don't start pointing the fingers at everyone.
Yeah.
And then hammering them with harsh punishments. No, not a good idea. Speaking of leadership, back to the book. I believe that some men and women are born with the inherent qualities that make them good leaders. Writing to his son, John, who was a cadet at West Point in 1943, General Eisenhower once said, "The one quality that can be developed by studious reflection and practice is the leadership of men." I agree with Ike. Leaders are not born. Leaders are made, and they are made by solid effort and hard work. So there's a little contradictory in there, because he says, look, some people are born with qualities that make them a good leader, but you can learn to be a good leader. I totally agree with that. I've always said that. Some people have the qualities that make them a good leader naturally, or they'll have some of them, right? Mm-hmm. Some of them will be really articulate. Some of them will be very charismatic, very dynamic, loud, have a lot of presence. Those are all characteristics that will differentiate in different people. And if you have a lot of those, you're going to have a naturally easier time being a good leader. Now, occasionally you get people that have some of those qualities, but they're idiots, And those are the worst because they can get people to follow them even though they don't know where they're going.
Yeah.
Those are bad situations.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Hard work, studying, right? Studying leadership. Today I already learned something. Need to increase my focus on honesty as a leadership quality. But yeah, I'm always studying, always learning, and we all need to be. That's how we're going to become a better leader. And a lot of the studying that I did when I was growing up in the teams was just, I was watching and thinking about why these leaders were doing what they're doing. What is making them do that? Good leader? Why do we respond to that well? Bad leader? Why don't we respond well to what he's doing? I wasn't sitting there consciously thinking about it. Actually, no, in some cases I was actually consciously thinking about it. Consciously thinking, wait, why does no one want to follow this guy? How is he acting that we all want to walk away from him? Why is that happening? And then when we get a good leader, I'd say, yeah, why is this guy such a good leader? So yeah, I guess I did consciously do that and study, not from books, but from life to try and learn.
Yeah.
And that's how you can become better. Here's a little note too. And you want to talk about holding the line. If you aren't in good physical shape, forget it. You are not going to be a good leader. Well, certainly in a military environment, that is true. Are there some civilian leaders that aren't in the best shape? Yeah, there are. Would those leaders be doing a better job if they were in better physical condition? Yes, they would. It's like that thing that starting strength, Coach Ripito says. I posted, I've never talked about it, but I posted, he's talking about how physical strength is good. And people that say that physical strength aren't good, he says, I forget the exact quote, but he's basically saying, I know physical strength is good. And if you take someone that says the physical strength isn't good and isn't important, and then you add 120 pounds to their squat and then ask them how they're doing now. They're going to be doing better.
Yeah.
They're going to be doing better. The more you can deadlift, the better you're going to feel. You don't feel worse when you can deadlift more. You don't feel worse when you can squat more. You feel better.
Yeah.
Well, why is that? There's a million reasons why. Confidence, overcoming the challenge. You're actually physically stronger. Your mental clarity goes up. So yeah, of course, be in good shape. Be in good shape. If you're worried about your health, you're not going to be able to focus on being a good leader. And in the military, or in any job where that demands physical exertion, you have to be in good shape. Otherwise, people are looking at you and you're falling apart. You can't be falling apart on a patrol. You can't be falling apart during a combat swimming operation where you need to swim. You need to swim far. You're going to swim for 4 straight hours on a combat swimmer operation. If you're weak and you can't do that, you think your men are going to respect you? They're not. I'll go ahead and answer that question for you.
Yeah. Is that kind of like the hockey coach who doesn't even know how to ice skate?
There are coaches that have never participated in the sport that they coach, and they're good. You can look at Greg Jackson, who's a great mixed martial arts coach. He's never been a mixed martial arts fighter.
Yeah, but he knows how to fight, though,
Yeah, certainly does. Yes. But he hasn't actually fought. So how can he be a good coach? What about Duke Rufus? He's never fought MMA, has he?
Oh, MMA? I'm not sure.
Yeah, we know he's a champion kickboxer, but how can he be such a great coach at MMA?
Yeah, because you can connect the dots and stuff like that.
Exactly.
And of course, there's exceptions to everything. But generally speaking, and plus you're talking about a little bit more of a broad thing, like a leader. Like who are we gonna follow?
Yeah, and plus because we're talking about coaches. Coaches are not participating anymore. That's why they're coaching, right?
Yeah.
So I guess those are really stupid examples.
Yeah, as far as coaches go,
because Customato with Mike Tyson. Obviously, he wasn't getting in the ring with Mike Tyson, right?
Yeah.
But he's a great coach, a fantastic coach, one of the most respected coaches of all time.
Yeah. And the results are a little bit more recognizable, like they're less ambiguous, like a leader's results, quote unquote.
Yeah, and we're looking at leaders in the field, like leaders in the job that are leading a group to accomplish a mission, right? That's different than a coach. A coach is outside the group.
Yeah.
So we're talking about someone that's in the group. Yeah, you got to be able to maintain. You got to be able to stay with your team physically. And it's not like you need to be the best. I was never the fastest guy. I was never the strongest guy, but I wasn't going to be falling behind on a patrol because I wasn't in good shape. That wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
And the only way that doesn't happen is you need to stay in shape. How do you stay in shape? Gotta have discipline.
Yep.
Yeah. So these questions answer themselves at some point. Maybe some point this podcast will just come on here and sit here in silence.
Yep. Good
now,
idea.
speaking of, this is good that you were talking about this. Here is a heavy punishment handed out. Talking about Colonel Bob Sink, who was the leader of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Here we go. Back to the book. Colonel Bob Sink certainly was one of the best. He set high standards and never compromised on those standards. After the paratroopers of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment earned their jump wings, Sink granted a 10-day furlough, but cautioned the men to conduct themselves appropriately. Several paratroopers reported late for duty after their furloughs expired. Sink called another regimental formation and publicly humiliated one paratrooper from each of his 9 companies. They called out the name of the last soldier to report to duty, and that paratrooper was marched in front of the formation under escort. An officer stripped him of his unit patch, forced him to unblouse his boots, and then escorted him from the field. What Sink was saying was paratroopers may be elite, but they had to follow the Army's rules and regulations. I liked that. For some reason, Sink liked me, respected me. He was always the man instrumental in getting me my next job. So there's a heavy punishment. Now, that's a clear message being sent, right? Clear message being sent. And I bet Colonel Sink at that time weighed, he's got 9 companies, so he's got hundreds and hundreds of guys, and he's going to make an example out of 9 of them, and it's going to be a real clear example, and that's going to leave an impression on 1,000 guys, close to 1,000 guys. That might be worth it, and he probably judged that it was worth it.
Yeah.
So, interesting perspective.
Yeah. I guess the question is that fair?
I would say to the guys that got booted from the regiment, I'd say their thoughts were that it was unfair. I would say for the guys that remained in the regiment, that realized that they had to maintain the standard, that realized there was going to be no slack, and that worked hard to make sure they maintained that, and therefore were more prepared for combat, I'd say it was real fair.
Right. So bigger picture kind of thing. Yeah. They were kind of the martyr,
Yeah. Like it's a real big picture thing. And who knows what kind of behind the scenes. We would have to get some details. If we were really going to cast judgment on that, maybe some of those guys were kind of slackers anyways.
Yeah.
And the company commander was like, hey, dude, we don't want this guy. Let's get rid of this guy or whatever,
Yeah.
And he only took certain members of the people that missed their furlough. So he didn't even, that's not fair. He only took certain members or certain people that missed their furlough. Didn't take all of them.
Yeah.
Just the last one to report. We don't take that around here.
Yeah.
It's an interesting dynamic.
Yep.
It's an interesting dynamic, but it's definitely showing. I don't know that I necessarily would have done that. Yeah. My assessment, I probably wouldn't have.
Yeah.
Not one guy from each company. Maybe like the 2 guys that grossly violated it. I don't think I would need to do 9.
Yeah.
But guess what? Colonel Sink did. Don't mess with Colonel Sink. And that's a good thing, little kind of image for you to have. Like, don't mess with Colonel Sink. Don't mess around in the battalion, in the regiment. We don't play. Another leader that he talks about here is McAuliffe. Back to the book. What we liked about McAuliffe was that he allowed us to do our jobs. You didn't have a lot of interference from McAuliffe. But with Taylor in command, this is another person, he told you what you needed to do here. He had to run everything. You can't do a good job if you don't have the chance to use your imagination and creativity. In my mind, Taylor was more interested in impressing his superiors than watching out for his men. Taylor was such a contrast with British General Montgomery. So he talks a little bit. Oh, okay. So first of all, clearly decentralized command. Don't give people the clear, specifics on how to do every little thing. Let them get creative. Let them come up with a solution. Perfect. Boom. We hear that over and over again. Why do we hear it over and over again? Because it's right. Because it's right. That's why we hear it over and over again. Now he talks about the famous British General Montgomery, Monty, who always gets portrayed a little bit stiff and a little bit British, right? And he says in here that the writers didn't know him, didn't see him on the battlefield, didn't see what he was like. And here's what he says. Here's what Dick Winter said about Montgomery. Back to the book. Montgomery was the real deal. I saw him on a number of occasions, and he always impressed me as a commander who lived the lifestyle that was beyond reproach for his staff to follow. He set the example. He addressed every division that was scheduled to participate in the invasion. He called us together and had every soldier take off his helmet so he could see the troops better. Yeah, props to Monty, right? Going around and talking to every single division, and then saying, "Hey boys, take off your helmets. I want to see your faces before you roll." It's legit. Props. There's, this book. A lot of this book is about self-discipline.
Sure.
Even this part right here. Back to the book. Self-discipline keeps you doing your job. Without it, you lose your pride and forget the importance of self-respect in the eyes of your fellow men. Pride keeps you going on. This is what I feared I would lose, the loss of the will to measure up to my men. So once you say, you know what, I don't care what my guys think anymore, you've lost it, right? Mm-hmm. If I say, look, I don't care what the guys think of me, think of what a driving force it is to have your team looking at you and saying, I'm going to make sure these guys respect me and I'm proud of what I'm doing, compared to I don't care what anyone thinks of me anymore. And you can see, when this happens to people, not just in the military or a business organization, but in life.
Yeah.
In life. At a certain point, you see a bum in the street. At a certain point, that bum said, you know what, I don't care what anyone thinks of me anymore.
Yeah.
I don't care what my family thinks of me. I don't care what the society thinks of me.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm not talking about every single bum, but a lot of them.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Generally the thing.
And as soon as you see that, you can imagine that's just like a life thing, right? Yeah. If you go through life and you say, don't care what anyone else thinks, which is a contradiction for me, right? Because I'll say all the time, like, I don't care what people think.
Yeah, but that's just to a degree. Like and it's obvious, and just put a little bit of thought into, you don't care about what people think, well, as it appears. You don't care what people think on a superficial level, on a profound level. True. You do. That's why that's why part of your morality is like, fairness, doing the right thing, all this discipline stuff. It's for you, but in regards to social cues and all these things like that, that's beneficial to your success, to function in a society. Yeah, and I've said this before, like about the SEAL teams and me being in the SEAL teams, and I completely had this attitude. I don't care, like for instance, I don't care what happens. Like I don't care if I get fired. I'm going to do the right thing. I don't care. I don't care what they think of me. And at the same time, there's nothing that was more important to me than my reputation in the SEAL teams. I don't want, if something was going to give you a bad reputation, like what we just talked about, if you fall out of a patrol as a leader or as anyone, like if you fall out of a patrol, no one's ever going to forget it in the SEAL teams. If you're too weak to do something, you're going to be remembered by that forever. And that, I didn't want that ever. Yeah. To be like, oh, Jocko did this. Jocko couldn't finish the patrol. Jocko was a bad leader. I didn't want that to be the reality. Yeah. And so therefore you work hard, you stay in shape, you do your best all the time. Yeah. And that drives you. Yeah. But at the same time, I wasn't saying, oh, I'm concerned what my boss thinks of me, so I'm going to act a certain way. No, I was trying to do the right thing. Right. For the teams, by the way. See what I'm saying? No, like these are all platoons. Those are all fundamental things. Yeah, it's a weird balance though to say, look, I don't care if I get promoted, but I care more than anything about my job. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that definitely was my attitude. Right. That definitely was my attitude my whole time I was in the military. Look, I'm going to do the best job I can. I'm not doing it to get promoted. I'm not doing it for that reason. Yeah. But I am part of it, absolutely doing it to have the respect of my peers and my bros in the teams. Right. Reputation, you hear that all the time. And reputation is everything in the SEAL teams because it's a small group of people.
You know, you have an accidental discharge with your weapon, everybody knows about it and they're going to know about it forever. If you remain on the teams for whatever reason, after you have an accidental discharge, everyone's going to know it from there on out. Yeah. And it's not fun. That's why we got some jacked up nicknames in the SEAL teams. Because you're going to get nicknamed after your lowest point in your life. Your biggest mistake is what you're going to get nicknamed. Or your biggest, Like there was a guy, and his nickname was Bush, and he's a great dude. Mm-hmm. His nickname was Bush. It had nothing to do with his last name, but anyways, long story short, when he was a new guy, and I knew him, this is 15 years later, I found this out. So he'd been in the SEAL teams for 15 years. I'd known him as Bush the whole time. And he was parachuting. Brand new guy, showed up to the team. They're like, hey, you're going jumping today. Okay, gets in the aircraft, jumps, and he lands through no fault. You can't even steer these round parachutes. You can't barely steer them. He lands in a bush with like thorns in it, right? And I guess it looked pretty funny. And from there on, what's his name? Bush. Yeah. So you're going to get a name like that. But that's a really easy example because everybody knows, hey, that's just funny. It was more of a funny thing. If something funny happens to you, you might get that nickname too. Like if you get pepper sprayed by the cops, you might have the nickname Pepper. Which
I like how direct it is.
Yeah, there's no sense in playing around. What else are you going to call someone that gets pepper sprayed by the cops when they're a new guy? You're going to call them Pepper.
You call them Wet Eye or something.
Wet Eye?
Yeah, because your eyes get all watery after you get pepper sprayed.
You're not going to be in charge of nicknames over here.
Remember your guy that you thought his name was Al?
Yeah.
But it was Owl?
Yeah, Big Al 50 Cal. Not even his name.
Yeah.
Not even his name, Big Al 50 Cal. Yeah.
That's good.
Morphed. Is that awesome? So that's why you have this weird dichotomy that's pulling at you. Is just you're looking at your friends, your peers in a leadership position. It's your men. You're looking at your men saying, hey, I don't want to let these guys down. I don't want them to view me as weak. Yeah. Weak's a bad word, but I guess it's the word I'm looking for. Yeah. Not that I want to maintain the image of strength, because part of maintaining the image of strength is by showing weakness and being like, I say this all the time. Hey, I don't know how to do this. Hey, can you give me a suggestion? I'm not talking about that type of thing. I'm talking about physical weakness, physical and mental toughness, or physical and mental weakness, right? That's a lot different than, hey, I don't understand how to do something, or it's a lot different than humility. You can want to maintain strength, but still have humility for sure. Yeah. I know all kinds. I know tons of guys that are completely humble, but they're the toughest bastards you'd ever want to know, mentally and physically. So I'm not talking about I need to be strong, stronger than everyone. No, I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about physical and mental toughness you have to have. And if you don't have them as a leader, could be problematic. Yeah. Watch out for it. Back to the book. The big thing I derived from combat was the necessity of maintaining discipline. Discipline in our troops and getting the job done in combat. So clearly, discipline's a big part of what we're talking about here. Gee, I wonder why. Now, this is talking another little aspect that, I don't talk about this a lot. I think it's inherent in a lot of things that I say, but it's not something that I don't use this word a lot. And again, I think I need to use it more. Back to the book. Character revolves around doing the right thing all the time. Character implies daily choices of right over wrong. The cadet prayer at West Point says cadets strive to choose the harder right instead of the easier wrong, and never to be content with a half-truth when the whole can be one. That gets to the heart of character. I would add that it is easier to do the right thing when everyone is looking. It is more difficult to do what you should do when you are alone. I like to think of character as every other virtue at the breaking point. So character, doing the right thing. Doing the right thing at all times. Doing the right thing when you're alone. Yeah. Back to the book. War doesn't alter character. War merely brings out the best that an individual has to offer. unfortunately, it also brings forth the worst in some men. If anything, war exposes the best and worst of those who are called to fight. I know of no man who lacked character in peace and then discovered character in combat. So I've said this same type of thing before, especially, war, you know what we'd see on deployment is as pressure starts to build on people, you start seeing people go in two directions. And that's what we'd see. Their character would start to reveal itself. They'd either get they'd rise to the occasion or they would not. And they'd go in the other direction and become worse. Their character would become worse or their character would become better. That's what I've seen. And the same thing, when we talk about people that maybe have a hard time dealing with war, a lot of times there's some pre-existing issues that the war inflames, right? And then if you take someone that doesn't have pre-existing issues or maybe has a positive spin on things, that becomes more positive. So it's and then there's a bunch of people in the middle. But some of the guys that I knew that really had a hard time, they had issues going in. They had problems, some issues going into the situation, going into war, and those problems get exacerbated by the pressure and the stress of combat. So we need to watch out for that one. Yeah, I think war is more of an amplifier than a creator. I think it amplifies good character. I think it amplifies bad character. I think it amplifies issues and in either direction. So it's a powerful element to add into people's lives. This big, intense piece. Now, one of the things that this book captures is these letters. He kind of had a pen pal, a female pen pal when he was at war. Her name was Dieta Allman. And one of the things that so they capture these letters. And parts of some of the letters are published in here. Here's one of them. Back to the book. First and most important, I've got my own conscience to answer to. Next, my parents. And then I am an officer in the U.S. Army. I am damn proud of it. And with the rank and position I hold, I wouldn't think of doing anything to bring discredit to my outfit, my paratrooper boots, wings, the airborne patch, or the U.S. Army. Good morale within an outfit is usually reflected by good conduct away from it. That sounds like an idealistic high school kid, I know, but that's it. That's how I feel. So he took that stuff very, very seriously. And I remember back in the day, pre-war, I was in my 3rd platoon, and the new guys, who are all my bros now, I mean, these are just mugs, but they were new guys, and we were the senior older guys, right? Because we'd been in the teams for like a couple years. And something happened, and we gave like, hey guys, don't ever make the platoon look bad. Like, no matter what, you don't make the platoon look bad. That's not allowed. The platoon comes first above everything. And this one, I just remember saying, but then one guy made the platoon look bad, and he had to pay for it. But that's the attitude. The attitude was like, look, you don't make the platoons look bad. You don't make the teams look bad. We weren't too concerned with the Navy back then. We didn't really even feel like, when I was that young in the SEAL teams, we weren't even thinking about the big Navy. We barely even recognized it. We were in the teams. It's more, as the teams became bigger and more prevalent, we connected more with the big Navy. But when I was a new guy when I was in the SEAL teams as a young guy in the 90s, we were pretty much on our own. So I wasn't like sitting there thinking, hey, I need to protect the reputation of the Navy. I didn't care. Right. I would now. As I got older, I did. Yeah. But back in the day, it was like, hey, the platoon. And I was at Team 1 at the time, and Team 1. Don't make Team 1 look bad. What are you doing? Don't make this platoon look bad. Yeah. You just did that? Yeah. Now you have to pay for that. Punishment. will be delivered at this time. And it was. That's a unfortunate situation. You know, these things just happen from time to time.
So are we not going into what the punishment was that day?
The punishment, the punishment was, I'll tell you what the punishment was.
Jocko punishment.
The punishment was, I am going to strike you 2 times in the face with an open hand. That's your punishment. Or we're going to fight. Which one do you want? That was the punishment.
Yeah.
And this guy was like, I'll take the 2.
Yeah.
And I was like, Roger that. And there was a little bit more tension than that, you know?
Yeah, fully. That's
because
really
he was kind of like bowed up a little bit.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, if you want to get it on, we'll get it on.
Yeah.
And then, and you know, it's funny because these guys, this group of guys who was, they were all guys just trying to get after it and be good team guys, but we were just crazy, you know, at this point. And the teams was literally everything in my life. So when I was like mad about disrespecting or making the platoon look bad, it like hurt me.
Yeah.
I was that crazy that I just didn't want the platoon to look bad.
Yeah.
You know, and you did something that made the platoon look bad.
Yeah.
It bothered me. It really, truly bothered me. You made something that made Team 1 look. I mean, I'd been there, you know, since I was a kid.
Yeah.
And it was everything to me. Mm-hmm. And so when you made us look bad, I wasn't happy. And not just I wasn't happy because I was a jerk or I wasn't happy, because I was being a jerk at the time. But talking to these guys, you know, years later, we talked to these guys, they're like, yeah, that guy in particular, he's like, I hated going to work. I hated you guys. And I was like, yeah, I'm sorry, you know. And then they'll be like, but I'm glad it was like that. Because everybody has that feeling. It was the old school. It was like with the old breed, you know. Right. Hey, this is the way it is. We hold the line. Mm-hmm. We don't make the platoon look bad. We make the platoon look good. We work hard. That's what we do. Mm-hmm. It was like a little gang. Yeah. That's all it was.
Yeah, that's crazy, those 2 choices, because they're like, they're just different. Because some people would rather go do the fight because, you know, at least they kind of go down swinging kind of attitude. But the potential for damage is way more in a fight. You know what I'm saying? But and then
actually, I agree with you, and you could see where you could make a case for both of those selections. But there's also something cool. It's like, I'll take 2 hits to the face. Yep. Open hand, cool. I'm a man. I screwed up. I think that's the reason I respected it was because it was like, yeah, I did screw up.
Right. So I'll just take it.
And I'll take it. I deserve punishment. Give it to me.
Yeah.
And that was that.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, that's,
and then we move on. No factor.
Yeah, technically the 2 to the face is way easier because it's way quicker. You know what to expect, kind of thing. I mean, unless you're scared of like, hitting your head and dying or some, some off.
They were open hand though. They were open hand.
Yeah. See, so
you're not going to knock anybody out with an open hand. Right?
Yeah. Well,
usually you're not.
You know, maybe I could, but I'm just kidding. But so a lot of that is like that. How you say you were kind of building some tension with it. It's like that's a big part of the punishment as well. That psychological like torture,
also,
turmoil.
And this also reveals my own personal immaturity. Right? This is it. Like seriously, this is when I'm thinking about it. This is just an immature. You know, I was probably 22 years old, maybe 23 years old, but you know, young and immature, and not getting the best guidance, not understanding things, not understanding that I wasn't helping build a cohesive unit, not understanding that this guy's probably thinking, oh, I don't want to help him, and you know what I mean? It wasn't smart. I'm not trying to say that this stuff was smart. I'm telling you the reality of the way it was. And the way it was in my head was, hey, this is my life. Yeah. This SEAL platoon, I know it sounds crazy. This SEAL platoon that we're in is my whole life, and I actually don't care about anything else. Mind you, this is in the 90s. There's no war going on. Yeah. I'm just a young, crazy kid, and the only thing I know and the only thing I care about is the SEAL teams. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you make the platoon look bad. This platoon is my life, and you just made us look bad, and I can't stand that, and I don't want it to be that way. So young, immature me, what do? Hey, there's got to be punishment, you know, and that's kind of the attitude we had, and there are some benefits to it, but you know, it's outweighed. If I would love to go back and be a better mentor and be like, hey, man. This is the mistake you made. You know, we need to make. You know, I would love to do that, but you can't. Yeah. I was a young, dumb kid that was raised that way, by the way, as well. That's how we were raised.
Yeah.
And there are some benefits to it. And like I said, even those guys that did platoons with me when I was quote unquote an old guy, even though we were nothing, we'd never been to combat, we were meaningless, but we had a couple more years in the SEAL team. So therefore you're an old guy, and the new guys are anyone with no deployments, which is actually pathetic in its own right, because the term in the SEAL teams being, oh, you're a new guy, that was from guys that were in Vietnam, that you hadn't been in combat yet.
Right,
so
right.
you're a new boy. You're a cherry boy. So guess what? I was a cherry boy for 13 years because I never shot my weapon at the enemy. I hadn't been in combat until I went to my first deployment to Iraq. So it was actually, from that perspective, it's embarrassing because here I was big. I'm an old guy. I wasn't an old guy.
Yeah.
I'd never been in combat before. What am I talking about?
Yeah.
But you take what you had at the time, which was this organization, the SEAL teams, my platoon, and again, I can't describe really how important the SEAL platoon was to me. It was, well, let me put it this way: it was my whole life.
There you go.
What did I do when I woke up in the morning? Went into work, worked out with my SEAL platoon mates. What do we do? Then we worked all day. What do we do for lunch? We ate together. What do we do at night? We went and got dinner. What do we do after that? We went and had drinks. What do we do after that? We hung out all night. What do we do after that? We went to sleep, woke up and did the same thing day after day. That was my family.
Yeah.
And you just have this passion for your family, and it was the most important thing in the world to me for my whole adult life.
Yeah,
but when you take that and you put that on a young kid,
yeah,
and everyone's like, oh yeah, Jocko's he's a big reader. I wasn't reading anything back then. I was reading the platoon handbook, right? I wasn't reading. I wasn't reading Shakespeare.
Sure.
Yeah. What was I doing in high school? I wasn't paying attention during high school. I was wanting to be a commando. I was running through the woods pretending I had a machine gun.
There you go.
So you take that kid and you put him in a situation where the thing that he cares about the most has been violated or scorned. He's going to try and handle it to the best of his ability.
Start slapping people.
So again, not proud of it, but occasionally some people got slapped around.
Yeah, that's how though. When you're a young basic guy, you're gonna handle things in a young basic kind of way.
Yeah, yeah.
Whatever.
It's caveman.
Yeah.
It's caveman scenario.
There you go.
And the other thing is, and those guys that were in those early platoons when I was like I said, a quote unquote old. Years later, they're like, yeah, that was awesome. So glad I got raised that way. They're proud of it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when I look back on it, I know I was not a good leader, right?
Yeah.
By any stretch.
Yeah, that's kind of like when I look at my old videos. At the time I'm
They're
like,
not as
yeah,
good.
they were dope. But you're like, you just know better ways now. You're just better now.
Yeah.
Hindsight 2020.
And then the other thing that you got to be careful of is setting the bar. Like, let's say I was in a SEAL platoon right now, and now I'm going to set the bar so high that I lose track of lose vision of the fact that, like, hey, the guy that I'm trying to convince right now is a 23-year-old thing, and the most important thing in his world is this. Is funny. Like, I was talking to someone the other day, and I was like, I couldn't remember what SEAL platoon, what the phonetic letter of a certain SEAL platoon I was in at a certain time. I was like, I forget what platoon that was.
Yeah.
And to me, at the time, when we were in those SEAL platoons, that letter of that phonetic alphabet, we were in an alpha platoon. That was it. And now I look back, and it's like, oh yeah, what platoon was that? Because as I matured and as I saw the rest of the world, I realized that even though a SEAL platoon is very important, and certainly it's the most important thing when you're in it, when you're in a task unit or you're overseas and there's multiple people running around and there's huge missions going, your mind gets opened up.
Yeah.
And you see more. And the little thing that you used to be so engulfed in your head becomes less. That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
Now I'm telling you, guys in the SEAL platoons, there's no better job. Like, it's the best thing in the world. And I'm sure, I never served in a Marine Corps infantry platoon or in a Army, U.S. Army infantry platoon, but I saw them. I saw what they were like, and they have that same, bond that you get from being in those tough units. So there's something very cool about that, about being a grunt.
Yeah,
which is what you are in the SEAL teams. You might think, oh, I'm a special operations or whatever. You're a grunt. You carry a machine gun.
Yeah,
and you do hard things. That's what being a grunt is. You're doing hard things. You're carrying a bunch of weight around. Love those days. Love those days.
Yeah, man.
All right. So, I just want to be back in the SEAL team right now so bad.
Yeah, I can kind of
It's
tell.
so fun, so awesome.
Yeah.
So awesome, so meaningful.
I would have
And-
fought you.
Yeah,
Straight
okay.
up.
Yeah,
It
you
would've
know
been
what
on-
would have happened. You know what would have happened.
I don't know, bro. Wait.
That was one of the good things about knowing a little tiny bit of jiu-jitsu, which I actually knew a little bit, and
Yeah.
that was enough.
Yeah, you can
That was
offer to
enough.
fight guys with with confidence.
good
Because what
confidence.
if you offer to fight them and they kick your ass? You're like, dang, that backfired.
And here's the thing: they didn't know any better. All they thought was they didn't. I don't think I ever said like I know jiu-jitsu and you don't.
Right.
But it was just I was so confident, like, oh, I actually know this, and I know that I can choke this dude. That they just said, oh, you know what, this guy's probably gonna kick my ass.
Yeah.
And the weird thing is, there's probably guys along the way that could have kicked my ass. You know, some kid that wrestled in high school, all double leg, boom, and now I'm slammed on the ground and getting punched in the head. I can't. You know, it's
Lesson not learned.
yeah, lesson not learned. Dang. I'm lucky that never happened.
I know.
So check. All right. Here we're talking about. So I just was talking about. This is interesting. So I was just talking about mental strength and physical strength. Well, here we go. Back to the book. Moral courage is a far rarer commodity than physical courage. In that, I agree with Patton. I have known many officers who were physically brave, but who did not have the intestinal fortitude to organize the chaos around them. Those officers who were the most vocal about what they were going to do to the enemy often were the first to fall apart when the chips were down. Fear is not only debilitating, but its existence also destroys the cohesion of a command. It is the responsibility of a commander to identify the limits of courage, break the paralysis of fear, and motivate his soldiers to continue with the mission. Courage conquers fear. I like just that part, and I don't think I did this in Helmet for My Pillow. There was a part in Helmet for My Pillow that I pulled out when I was talking to one of my SEAL buddies, and I was, because he listened to it, he said, yeah, and I was telling him this one part that I didn't put in the podcast, and I sent him a picture of it from the book, this little paragraph, but it's basically one of the instructors, one of the drill instructors was all yelling about, we're going to kill and blah, 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 and then he says, yeah, the next time I saw him, we were in, on island, in the fight, and he was getting taken away after breaking down. Dang. So this is what he's saying here. A lot of guys that are the loudest about what they're going to do to the enemy. Yeah, okay. You're talking a big game, you know, but what's really good? You know where else that happens? UFC.
Yeah.
Right?
MMA, yeah.
MMA, it happens. Yeah. I'm going to crush that guy. And the other guy's sitting there going, okay, bring it.
Yeah. Or he's in the locker room, like, explaining to all his teammates, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And it's almost like, it's weird.
They're trying to
convince themselves.
Yeah. So that's what's going on here. Same thing, right? Somebody that's trying to convince themselves, they're not confident in themselves.
Yeah.
Back to the book. I suspect every soldier at one time or another experiences a degree of fear. Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the willingness to rise above fear and do the things you know need to be accomplished. All soldiers hope that they will measure up the first time they get into a fight. I certainly was no exception, but I believe I had prepared myself very well that once I came under fire, I knew instinctively what needed to be done. I think I was more apprehensive, particularly before D-Day, than I was afraid. Maybe apprehension is the first stage of fear. I'm not really sure. You have to remember that Easy Company was an elite unit, as were all paratroopers. We had trained for nearly 2 years before we jumped into Normandy. I think I saw far more excitement in the eyes of my men than I did fear. After Breakourt, we felt as if we were seasoned veterans, even though we knew worse days were ahead. Yeah. That apprehension, and definitely my first deployment to Iraq, when you had all these guys, bro, the guys were so fired up to get it, to do real missions and get after it, that I think it was much more excitement than it was fear, especially in the beginning. And in the beginning, there wasn't a lot of casualties going on. We were kind of dominating.
Right.
And Even showing up to Ramadi, same thing. Guys are like, sign me up. What mission? I'm going.
Yeah.
And the more you spend time in that, the more you realize what the threat is, and you start losing guys or having guys getting wounded. That's when you start saying, okay, wait a second. I'm not sure I want to die today. Yeah. And then guys got to overcome that on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Speaking of fear, Steve Ambrose, who's a military historian, written a bunch of books, including Band of Brothers. Steve Ambrose says that heavy artillery bombardment will make even the most seasoned veteran eventually break. I disagree. A leader has to overcome fear, convince himself that every enemy shell or bullet is not targeting him. The same is true in a company or a battalion. Leaders must ensure that strength and cohesion is a stronger force than fear. This is especially true in men who have been scarred by prolonged combat. Ambrose was correct when he titled the chapter in Band of Brothers Breaking Point, as he describes the horrendous artillery barrage that inflicted so many casualties on Easy Company in the Bois Jacques. Company strength was below 50%, and many of the non-commissioned officers were killed or wounded. Without direct supervision by leaders, Easy Company, as well as the remainder of the battalion, could have easily been debilitated by an increased sense of morality and fear. That is precisely why I made it a point to visit the front lines as often as possible. Soldiers need a sense that their leaders and commanders are in the game with them. Leadership by example is even more important in these situations. I noticed that when men are at the edge of their physical endurance, you tend to develop that 1,000-yard stare that you always read about. Tired soldiers will often take off their helmet and run their fingers through their hair. I've talked about that before, and I talk about that quite often now. At times, they literally drop their helmets on the ground. This soldier is already losing his self-respect. The battle is half lost. That's a sign for the commander to take immediate action. I didn't wait for the trooper to reach that stage. I proactively looked for these signs. Every soldier wants to do the right thing. You always know the proper thing to do, but doing it is sometimes more difficult. I never wanted a man to lose his self-respect. That's what I was talking about earlier, this idea of self-respect. When you don't care, because you get supposed to keep your gear on all the time. That's like just the code, right? You keep your gear with you all the time. You keep your gear on all the time. The minute you take that off is where you start, hey, I don't care what these guys think anymore. Something has happened that has made you say, you know what, I don't care what these guys think anymore. And that's not good.
Yeah.
And again, this is such a contradiction because, we can sit here and talk about like, hey, I don't care what people think. And I mean that. You shouldn't care what people think. But at the same time, it should be extremely important to you what people think and what your comrades think. And that's such a weird dichotomy. I don't think I've fully wrapped my hands around how to describe that yet and what that means. I'll get there eventually, hopefully.
Sure.
But that is a very important thing. And I've always felt like I don't care what people think. But at the same time, I deeply care what my peers think and my men think. Weird dichotomy.
Yeah, I think that's a core values thing, though. It's like you have these core values, and that's what you care about. What you think about it, what everyone else thinks about it. And then anything beyond that is just superficial fluff. Like if you don't match your socks or something like this.
I think what the key principle here, or the part that may help bring this together for me, is I want to be doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so if I'm doing the right thing and people say, oh, Jocko's, that's stupid what Jocko's doing, or he shouldn't be doing that. But I know in my heart I'm doing the right thing.
Yeah.
I'm going to continue doing it. I don't care what you think.
Yeah. There you go.
But at the same time, if I know I'm doing the right thing and other people are judging me, that's going to keep me in line. Let me rephrase that. If I feel like I'm going to do the wrong thing, I do care what people think.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to think, oh, Jocko's getting weak, getting soft, getting, whatever.
Yeah.
He's doing the wrong thing. He's making the wrong move.
Mm-hmm.
Very strange. That's the dichotomy of leadership, right? Mm-hmm. Or one of them. Actually, it's not really the dichotomy of leadership. That's just a dichotomy in life.
Yeah, life, yeah.
Now there's a guy named Lieutenant Compton who kind of breaks a little bit, and they show it in the Band of Brothers movie, and Dick Winters talks about it here. Back to the book. Before you go on, I know you think I'm too hard on Lieutenant Compton for walking off the line at Bastogne. Let me explain myself. Buck, that's Lieutenant Compton, was nicknamed Buck, and he walked off the line. Buck was a great combat leader. He was a superb platoon leader in Normandy and Holland. In fact, I would say he was one of the best. At Bastogne, he broke after some of his friends were seriously wounded in the constant artillery barrages. There is a danger of getting too close to the men, and Buck crossed that line. When you see your friends getting maimed, it makes it more difficult to go on. That's why I always maintained a certain detachment from the paratroopers in Easy Company. Am I too harsh on Buck? Maybe, but a leader needs to rise above fear. The easiest thing to do is quit. And then the author asks, why didn't you crack? And Dick Winters' response is, I'm Pennsylvania Dutch. I don't quit. I made a commitment. Moral courage is based on physical fitness. Courage is a combination of willpower and determination. I was in excellent physical shape. I don't think there was a man in that outfit who was in better shape than I was, and it showed. I had trained hard. In England, after we finished training, I would run at night. Blackout conditions, but I would run. Then I'd come in and go to bed. I was in maximum shape. That was the physical side of things. But there is a mental aspect of stamina as well. I've always prided myself that I do my own thinking. I have my own philosophy. I have my own answers to the reasons things have turned out in my life. By taking full accountability for my life, I've been able to meet the standards that I set for myself. I don't know any other way of saying it. Every commander must take full accountability for his actions. Stand up and be counted. As a commander, you are accountable for everything that your outfit does or fails to do. Don't worry about who receives credit when things go well. Don't play the blame game. In my case, the mantle of command provided me with the courage to succeed. Yeah. Extreme ownership, that's what he's talking about. Personal accountability, that's what he's talking about. Being in great physical condition, that's what he's talking about. That's discipline. I guess as we read this, and I didn't read this book until a week ago. Yeah, a week ago I read this book. So it's not like I read this book and said, hey, personal accountability is the most important thing about, being a leader. No. This guy came to the same conclusion in World War II that I came to in conclusion in my experience in the military. Now he starts talking a little bit about combat fatigue, how much combat fatigue there was. In Normandy, I witnessed lots of stress, some in Holland, much more in Bastogne due to the intense cold, lack of sleep, and inadequate clothing. In Belgium, combat fatigue reached astronomical proportions. We had spent 70 days in the front lines in Holland and didn't have time to recover before we boarded the trucks to take us to Bastogne. On reflection, I realized what happened by the time the command arrived at Bastogne. The men had been on the front line since Normandy. Men were exhausted. No hot food, little sleep, no rest, constant tension, and intense pressure from combat. They were physically exhausted. Inclement weather and constant rain and snow made matters even worse. Physical exhaustion leads to mental exhaustion, which in turn causes men to lose discipline. The loss of self-discipline produces combat fatigue. Over and over again. Over and over again we hear that. How important is discipline? It is the most important thing. And if discipline is what gets people through these situations, through combat stress, through tension, through bombs, through artillery, through freezing cold, lack of food, lack of sleep, imagine what discipline can do in like a normal person's life.
Yeah.
back to the book, how can you possibly compare a man who's been under just one concentrated artillery bombardment for 5 minutes to a place like Bastogne, where he could be in the line for weeks or months? In one of Ambrose's books, he states that prolonged artillery bombardment will break any soldier. In civilian life, of course, we refer to combat fatigue as a mental breakdown. That is exactly the way it is in combat. It's a mental breakdown. The intensity, it becomes a problem for me to express my feelings here, but I'd like to share it with you. The intensity of a fire or a heavy concentration, to be a leader, you have to be able to concentrate on that fire and move just as soon as it stops or the last rounds hit. Move. Get up. Start circulating among your men. Is everybody okay? Let's get up. Let's move. Keep your eye open for an attack. Get their attention. Move among your men as quickly as possible. And moving among them, the fact that they see you and they're talking to you, they know that you are there and you are talking to them, and it makes all the difference in the world to know that you are not in this thing by yourself. That's what officers must do. Break the cycle of fear. If a soldier is concentrating on his own feelings and on his own fear, and he sees you moving around, he realizes that you're sharing the burden with him. That's why he can then move. So that's very important. And that's, again, that can apply to combat, that can apply to business. People are going to start panicking. What are they going to do when they start panicking? You and the leader, as the leader, need to step up, get out there, talk to people, find out what's going on, tell them that we're going to move. Show them that you're not afraid and that you are afraid, but you're still functioning. Lead by example. Plain and simple. Back to the book. Courage will be spent if you relax your standards. An undisciplined soldier feels isolated and alone. Maintain the standards. Don't compromise your integrity. Never give up. Don't ever give up. I love this right here. There is always one more thing that a leader can do to improve his situation, and that of his command. I always felt that a leader's physical presence was indispensable to unit cohesion and morale. This is why Captain Sobel failed so miserably. Leadership by example always trumps leadership by fear. There's always one more thing that a leader can do to improve his situation and that of his command. There's always one more thing you can do. And an undisciplined soldier feels isolated and alone. They know they've given up that self-respect. How are you going to give it back to them? When your men are dying and you do not, you feel ashamed. I don't know any other way of saying it. Soldiers in war, certainly in World War II, and I suspect in every war, are generally young men in their prime. They meet death daily and in every form. They fully realize the hazards of their profession. They take chances because no young man expects to die before middle age. When the first soldier dies, that belief in immortality is shattered. As casualties mount and the core of the unit grows fewer, the remaining soldiers grow even stronger, often shutting off replacement soldiers. They don't want to know the replacements because they are often the first to die. When I saw one of my men wounded, I was happy that he had a ticket home. A soldier killed in battle was at peace. He had lived his life among men whom he had loved. I took a degree of consolation in knowing that my men had lived rather than regretting that they had died. A soldier's real fear is not losing his life in combat, but placing his comrades in jeopardy. That's why ordinary men will perform in extraordinary ways to ensure that their buddies survive. So this is another level of, war. When you're actually, and I never was at this point by any stretch, where you're looking at men that get wounded and saying, oh, lucky him, he's got a ticket home. We just weren't underneath that kind of casualty level at all. So when guys were getting wounded, it was hard. It was, you didn't feel like, oh, lucky him, he's got a ticket home. Because there wasn't enough guys getting wounded to make you think that way. And not enough guys getting killed to make you think that way. Small percentage. That's reaching a whole new level. Back to the book. If you have selected the right personnel, then a leader must instill discipline. I mean perfect discipline. As Patton once said, discipline is the soul of the army. General Washington said the same thing when he described the Continental Army in 1776. Discipline is manifested in how well a soldier keeps his uniform, how frequently he cleans his weapon, and the pride he has in his unit. Joe Hogan of Easy Company speaks for all of us on the subject of pride in Company E. During an argument with a soldier from another company about whose company was better, Joe said, "My Company E will lick your company in 15 minutes. And if you wait until the guys who are AWOL come back, we'll do it in 5 minutes." And this is important. Unit pride leads to unit discipline. So again, now we're going back to the feelings that I had when I was a young kid in the SEAL teams. Total pride in my platoon. And this is funny because you're saying, like, look, the guys that are gone right now, they're AWOL, they're absent without leave. If you wait for them to come back, we'll be getting this done in 5 minutes. But, I feel like this unit pride and unit discipline and how they go together, it's like a gang. I don't know why I think of it this way, and I talked about this at the muster. It's like a gang mentality when you start policing yourself up, right? Yeah. When I was in a SEAL platoon, it wasn't our bosses that were trying to keep us in line. We kept ourselves in line. You didn't want to get outside. You didn't want to do something wrong because you were going to get policed up by the boys. The E5 Mafia is what we were. So the E5 Mafia, that's a real thing, by the way. The E5 Mafia in a SEAL platoon, you got the senior guys. There's like the platoon chief, the leading petty officer. Those are like E6, E7, and you got the assistant platoon commander. Those are like they call them the top four. Those are the guys that kind of run. They're the actual leadership. And then you got the nugs, and then in the middle of the pack right there, you got the E5s. They're the guys that are actually running things and making things happen. And the E5 Mafia is what we call them. And then at a SEAL team, there's an E5 Mafia that all works together to make things happen. But with the E5 Mafia, if you've got a good unit, that E5 Mafia, they're policing up everything. And you don't need to, as a leader, you just need to make sure that they don't take it too far. Is the only thing you need to make sure of. Yeah. But they're gonna make sure guys are doing the right thing. They're gonna make sure that they're performing well. They're gonna make sure that they're in good shape. They're gonna make sure of all those things. And this was an interesting quote. What you tolerate, you condone. So again, Extreme Ownership, written by myself and Leif Babin. Well, Leif Babin wrote a line in there that says, it's not what you preach, it's what you tolerate. And he hadn't read this book, and here it is. What you tolerate, you condone. It's just saying the exact same thing. If you let standards start to slide, that's what you're done. That's the new standard. Yeah. Of course, there's a little bit more to leadership than what we've talked about so far. Back to the book, Leading in Battle is the art of dealing with human nature and the human condition. I can't speak of higher command, but I know a few things about leadership at the small unit level. Leadership at all levels wins wars, but soldiers at the platoon, company, and battalion levels win battles. I think this is particularly true in the national army, where soldiers need to understand the reasons behind the officer's orders. We have to know why we're doing what we're doing. Would I have succeeded had I been promoted beyond battalion? I don't know. I do know that I felt comfortable at the small unit level. This is one reason why Easy Company holds such a tender place in my heart. I knew the strengths and weaknesses of every paratrooper. I could rapidly ascertain what I wanted to do and felt confident that I could convince the men to do it. After commanding Easy Company in Normandy and Holland, I know that the men felt comfortable entrusting their lives to my care. I'm not bragging because it's not my nature to do so. I'm stating fact. Knowing that I would never ask them to do anything that I wouldn't do myself led to Easy Company's confidence in me as a leader. They knew that I would never quit and that I would do everything within my power to bring them home after the war. I'm proud when I hear a paratrooper from Easy Company or 2nd Battalion remark about my courage under fire and my willingness to share their hardships. I told you once that wars do not make great men, but wars sometimes bring out the greatness in good men. Human nature. That's what it is. And that's sort of how I describe this podcast now. An exploration of human nature. And if you want to see human nature reveal itself in its most clearest form, you have to go to war to look at that. Or other very strenuous situations, harsh situations.